The bustling city of East Haven was alive with activity, its towering skyscrapers casting long shadows over the quieter, darker alleys below. Amid the noise of car horns and chatter, a lone figure sat slumped against a graffiti-covered wall. His name was Terrence Brown, a weathered man in his late 40s, his face etched with lines that told tales of hardship and resilience. Terrence had been living on the streets for over a year, carrying only a tattered backpack and a worn photo of a young boy, his son. Passers-by barely noticed him as they hurried past, avoiding eye contact. A few sneered, while others clutched their belongings tighter, as if his mere presence posed a threat. Terrence, however, wasn't begging or pleading for help. He simply sat there, gazing at the world as it moved on without him. At the corner, a patrol car slowed to a stop. Officers Mark Weston and Daniel Carter, known for their arrogance and disdain for the city's less fortunate, stepped out. Mark, a middle-aged man with a permanent scowl, nudged Daniel and pointed toward Terrence. "Another one of those guys," Mark muttered. "Probably up to no good. Let's go see what his story is." They approached Terrence, their heavy boots echoing against the pavement. "What are you doing here?" Mark barked, his tone sharp and condescending. "Loitering, huh? Got nowhere else to be?" Terrence looked up, his tired eyes meeting Mark's glare. "I'm just sitting, officer, not bothering anyone." "Yeah? Well, sitting here counts as trespassing," Daniel chimed in. "You've got 5 minutes to move." A woman passing by paused. "Officers, he's not hurting anyone. Maybe he just needs help?" Mark shot her a dismissive look. "Lady, stay out of it. We know how to handle these types." Terrence stood slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of compliance. "I'll leave," he said softly. But as he turned, his backpack slipped open, and the photo of the boy fell out. Mark picked it up, glancing at the image before tossing it back carelessly. "You'd better keep moving. We don't want people like you hanging around." Terrence bent to retrieve the photo, his hands trembling. As he walked away, the woman who had spoken earlier followed him, her eyes filled with concern. The officers returned to their car, laughing as they drove off. Unbeknownst to them, Terrence's story was far more extraordinary and heartbreaking than they could have imagined. And soon, the truth would unravel in a way that would change their lives forever. The evening sun cast a golden glow over East Haven, but for Terrence, the world remained cold and unwelcoming. He walked aimlessly, clutching the photo of his son like a lifeline. He hadn't seen his boy, Liam, in over 2 years. The pain of separation weighed on him, but circumstances had left him powerless to change his fate. As he wandered into a public park, he sat on a bench, hoping for a moment of peace. However, his presence did not go unnoticed. Families gave him side glances, mothers pulling their children closer. Some muttered under their breath, their words filled with disdain. "Why can't they just clean up the streets?" a man whispered loudly to his wife. "It's disgusting." Terrence ignored the comments as he had learned to do, but the judgmental stares never stopped cutting deep. Meanwhile, officers Mark Weston and Daniel Carter were parked nearby, sipping coffee and watching the park's activity. From their car, they spotted Terrence again, sitting alone on the bench. "Didn't we tell him to move on?" Mark said, tossing his coffee cup into the car's trash. "Looks like he didn't get the message." "Let's go teach him a lesson," Daniel added, smirking. The officers approached Terrence, their shadows looming over him. Mark crossed his arms, his voice dripping with authority. "Didn't we already tell you to leave? You can't just sit wherever you want, buddy." "I'm not causing any trouble," Terrence replied calmly, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "I just needed a place to rest." "Rest?" Daniel scoffed. "You mean loiter. You people are all the same. Always an excuse, always a sob story. What is it this time? Lost your job? Your family?" Terrence's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Mark stepped closer, pointing to the sign that read, "No trespassing after sunset." "You see that sign?" It applies to everyone, even you. Now get up and move before we make this official." A small crowd began to gather, their murmurs growing louder. Some seemed curious, others uncomfortable. A young woman, her arms full of groceries, stepped forward. "Officers, is this really necessary? He's just sitting here. Maybe he needs help, not harassment." Mark shot her a cold stare. "Ma'am, we're doing our job. If you have a problem, take it up with City Hall." Terrence stood slowly, gripping his backpack. "I'll go," he said, his voice barely audible. He started to walk away, but his legs wobbled and he stumbled to the ground. The officers hesitated for a moment, but instead of offering assistance, Mark chuckled. "See? Probably drunk or high. Not our problem." The woman knelt beside Terrence, helping him to his feet. "Are you okay?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Terrence nodded weakly, mumbling a thank you. As he straightened up, a worn military tag slipped out of his shirt, glinting in the fading sunlight. The woman noticed it and froze. "You're a veteran?" she asked, her tone shifting to one of astonishment. Terrence nodded again, his eyes downcast. "I served, a long time ago." The crowd began to murmur louder now, their judgment turning into curiosity. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "What's going on here?" A deeper voice boomed. Another police officer, Sergeant Elena Ramirez, approached the scene. She was known for her fairness and strong leadership. Mark cleared his throat. "Just handling a trespassing issue, Sergeant. This guy—" Elena cut him off, her eyes locking onto the military tag around Terrence's neck. "A trespasser, huh? Funny, I don't think a veteran deserves to be treated like this. Did you even bother to ask his story?" Mark fumbled for words, but Elena wasn't interested. "Let's talk, sir," she said to Terrence, her voice kind and steady. "Maybe there's more to this than these two realize." Terrence hesitated but nodded. As he walked with Sergeant Ramirez, Mark and Daniel stood awkwardly, the weight of their assumptions slowly sinking in. Unbeknownst to them, this small act of compassion would lead to a revelation that would leave everyone speechless and redefine what it meant to truly serve and protect. Sergeant Elena Ramirez guided Terrence to a quieter spot in the park, away from the lingering crowd and the judging eyes of her colleagues. She handed him a bottle of water from her utility belt and crouched down to meet his tired gaze. "Take your time," she said softly. "I can tell there's more to your story. I'm here to listen." Terrence hesitated, clutching the photo of his son tightly. He'd grown accustomed to rejection and distrust, but there was something sincere about her demeanor that made him want to speak. After a moment, he took a deep breath and began. "I didn't always live like this," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I served in the Army for nearly 10 years. I was stationed overseas, fought in places I'd rather forget, and lost friends I'll never stop missing." Elena's face softened as she listened. "Thank you for your service. What happened after you came back?" Terrence looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of hard labor and survival. "When I returned, everything felt different. My wife had moved on, and my son Liam was just a little boy. I couldn't find steady work. The nightmares didn't help either. Eventually, I lost everything. My job, my home, even my son. I haven't seen him in 2 years. He paused, his voice trembling. "But I carry this picture with me every day. It's the only thing that keeps me going." Elena noticed the photo of a young boy, his face full of life and joy. It was worn at the edges, clearly cherished. "Have you tried reaching out to him?" Elena asked gently. Terrence nodded. "I've tried everything. Social services, shelters, even churches. But no one seems to care when you're homeless, let alone a black man in this city." Elena felt a pang of guilt. She had joined the force to make a difference, but stories like Terrence's reminded her how often the system failed, the very people it was supposed to protect. As they talked, Mark and Daniel watched from a distance, their earlier arrogance replaced by visible discomfort. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Daniel asked, his voice uncertain. Mark shrugged, but his usual bravado was absent. "I don't know, but that sergeant sure seems to think so." Back with Elena, Terrence continued his story. "Yesterday I heard about a job opening at a local construction site. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be a fresh start. But when I showed up, they laughed at me, said they don't hire people who look like me." Elena clenched her fists, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "That's unacceptable. Did you report them?" Terrence shook his head. "What's the point? No one listens to people like me." Elena stood, her resolve firm. "I'm listening now, and I'm going to do something about this. But first, let's get you some help." A shocking revelation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena decided to take Terrence to the precinct. She wanted to connect him with veteran resources and ensure he had a safe place to stay for the night. Mark and Daniel watched in disbelief as Elena opened the car door for Terrence, treating him with the dignity they hadn't. "Are we really doing this?" Mark muttered as Elena walked past. "We should have done it hours ago," she shot back, her tone sharp.
When they arrived at the station, Elena ran a quick background check on Terrence, hoping to find records that could help locate his son. What she discovered, however, left her stunned. "Terrence Brown," she read aloud. "Honored with the Silver Star for Valor in Combat, 2-time Medal of Honor nominee, and a commendation for saving his entire unit during an ambush in Afghanistan." Mark and Daniel, who had been lingering nearby, froze. "He's a hero?" Daniel whispered, his face pale. Eleanor turned to them, her eyes blazing. "Yes, he is. And you treated him like garbage. Do you even realize how wrong that is?" Mark stammered. "We didn't know." "That's the problem," Eleanor interrupted. "You didn't care to know. You saw a homeless black man and assumed the worst. And now you have to live with that." Terrence, who had overheard the exchange, stepped forward. "I didn't tell you any of this for pity. I just want to see my son again. That's all that matters to me." Eleanor nodded. "And we're going to make that happen." A glimmer of hope. Eleanor contacted a local veteran support organization and shared Terrence's story. They immediately stepped in, offering him temporary housing, counseling, and assistance in finding employment. Meanwhile, Eleanor dug deeper into public records and found an address linked to Terrence's son, Liam, who was now living with a foster family. With permission from the family, she arranged a reunion. When the day finally came, Terrence stood nervously outside the small suburban home, his hands trembling. The door opened, and a young boy, with bright eyes and a wide smile, ran out. "Dad!" Liam cried, throwing his arms around Terrence. Terrence held his son tightly, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Back at the station, Mark and Daniel watched the news coverage of the reunion, their faces a mixture of shame and reflection. "Maybe we need to rethink how we do our jobs," Daniel said quietly. Mark nodded, for once at a loss for words. The reunion between Terrence and Liam was a powerful moment, but it was only the beginning of a larger transformation. Not just for Terrence, but for everyone involved. As father and son held each other, the foster parents watched from the doorway, their expressions a blend of relief and happiness. "We've heard so much about you, said Maria, the foster mother, extending a hand to Terrence. "Liam talks about you every day." Terrence smiled through his tears. "Thank you for taking care of him. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Maria nodded. "He's a wonderful boy. And now that you're back in his life, We'll do whatever we can to support you both. A step towards stability, with the help of the Veteran Support Organization, Terence began to rebuild his life. They provided him with temporary housing, job training, and counseling to address the trauma he had carried for years. 1 week after the reunion, Terence walked into a construction company for an interview, his head held high. Unlike his previous experiences, this time he was met with respect and understanding. The manager, a former Marine, was moved by Terence's story and offered him a position on the spot. "Welcome aboard, Terence," the manager said, shaking his hand firmly. For the first time in years, Terence felt a sense of purpose. He worked tirelessly, determined to prove himself and provide a stable life for Liam. The ripple effect back at the police precinct. Sergeant Elena Ramirez didn't let the incident with Mark and Daniel go unnoticed. She called a meeting with her team, determined to address the biases and assumptions that had led to their mistreatment of Terence. As police officers, our job is to serve and protect everyone, Elena began, her tone firm. But that means treating people with dignity, no matter their circumstances. Terence Brown is a decorated veteran, a father, and a human being. Yet, he was treated like a criminal because of his appearance. Mark and Daniel sat in the back, their faces red with embarrassment. They knew Elena's words were directed at them, but they also knew she was right. Elena continued, "This isn't just about Terence. It's about the countless others who face the same prejudice every day. We need to do better. And that starts with recognizing our own biases and holding each other accountable." To drive the message home, Elena arranged for the precinct to participate in community outreach programs, including partnerships with shelters and veteran organizations. She also implemented bias training, ensuring that every officer understood the importance of empathy and fairness. Mark and Daniel reluctantly attended the sessions, but as they listened to the stories of those who had been unfairly judged, something began to shift within them. Facing the consequences, one afternoon, Mark approached Elena in her office. He looked hesitant, almost nervous as he spoke. "Sergeant, I just wanted to say, I was wrong," he admitted. "About Terence, about how we handled that situation. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and it wasn't fair." Elena leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, Mark, but words mean nothing without action. Are you ready to change the way you approach your job?" Mark nodded. "Yes, I am. I want to make things right." Elena handed him a flyer for an upcoming volunteer event at the local shelter. "Good. Start here." A chance encounter. Several weeks later, Mark and Daniel were volunteering at the shelter, serving meals to those in need. It was an unfamiliar experience for them, but it opened their eyes to the struggles many people faced. As they worked, Terence walked in with Liam by his side. He paused when he saw the two officers, his expression guarded. Mark swallowed hard, then stepped forward. "Terence, I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "The way we treated you was wrong, and I'm sorry. You deserved better." Terence studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "It means a lot." Daniel chimed in, his voice softer than usual. "We're trying to do better, and if there's anything we can do to help, let us know." Terence smiled faintly. "Just keep treating people with respect. That's all anyone really wants." A new chapter. As the months passed, Terence's life continued to improve. He secured a permanent home for himself and Liam, who thrived under his father's care. The bond between them grew stronger every day, and the weight of the past began to lift. Terence also became an advocate for homeless veterans, sharing his story at events and working with organizations to ensure others received the support they needed. His resilience and determination inspired countless people, including Mark and Daniel, who became regular volunteers at the shelter. A community transformed. The impact of Terence's story extended far beyond his personal journey. It sparked a shift in the community, encouraging people to look beyond appearances and offer compassion instead of judgment. At the precinct, Elena felt a sense of pride as she watched her team grow and change. Mark and Daniel, once hardened by their biases, became vocal advocates for fairness and accountability. As for Terence, he found peace in knowing that his struggles had not been in vain. He had not only reunited with his son, but also helped create a more empathetic world for others. The legacy of change. One evening, as the sun set over East Haven, Terence sat on the porch with Liam watching the stars. "Do you think things will keep getting better, Dad?" Liam asked, leaning against his father's shoulder. Terence smiled, his heart full. "I do, son. Because when people open their hearts and minds, change is always possible." And for Terence, Liam, and the community of East Haven, that change was only the beginning.